I have been flooded with emails asking me what I thought about Andrew Maguire's groundbreaking interview on King World News. My response was simply that these guys have no idea what they're up against. In the interview with Eric King, Andrew Maguire said that a few calls from powerful people shut down all of their efforts to launch the Pan-Asian Gold Exchange. Andrew should consider himself lucky, as he already survived a very questionable hit and run to only have his efforts thwarted by a few phone calls. I fear that unless Andrew and the rest of us realize what we're up against and change our tactics, his next efforts may be stopped by something far more serious. I have great respect for Andrew Maguire's tenacity, and he has an absolute correct view of the problem, but unfortunately I feel he does not have the correct answer. Andrew correctly sees that heavily leveraged long silver players who are forced out of the market are just as big as a problem as the manipulative shorts that raid the markets. He correctly shows that actions like the Leap Day Metals massacre was a totally concocted paper event to manipulate the paper price down and to turn back weeks of price advancing in one shot. In order to see where his answer, his silver arrow, falls short, we need to look deeper into the problem. It is difficult to get a man to understand something when his salary depends on him not understanding it. Upton Sinclair. Andrew Maguire was a former Goldman Sachs metals trader who testified with Gada at the CFTC public hearing on how the major bullion banks manipulate the gold and silver markets. Not surprisingly, all of this fell on deaf ears, as usual, since the CFTC is part of the problem. Ted Butler has for years banged his head against the wall trying to get those who should do the right thing to do their job. Until he understands that the men he is trying to convince have a stake in the current paradigm and will never change, he will have wasted a better part of his life on something that will never come to be. Gada is another organization that has done an incredible effort to expose the fraud, even taking out a $264,000 full-page ad in the Wall Street Journal in 2008. That effort alone was bold, but it did not change anything. All three of these valiant metal crusaders and hundreds of others who worked tirelessly on exposing this fraud of a lifetime will waste all of their efforts unless something fundamentally changes. Andrew Maguire thought he had the answer with the Pan-Asian Gold Exchange. In the Pan-Asian Gold Exchange, metals would be exchanged outside of the Anglo-American Empire's control in Kunming City, China. The idea was that this exchange would bring more competition to the Anglo-dominated markets, and that this market would not be subject to the same market shenanigans and force players to take physical delivery. It could have been a huge threat to the fractional reserve bullion banking system, as Andrew Maguire pointed out. As more physical metal and money flows towards those markets, the more it would chip away at the illusion of the Anglo-American markets. Andrew Maguire then goes on to say in his King World News interview that, quote, a New York-based entity with very strong Chinese relationship made a few phone calls and killed Page. Just like that, months of work down the drain. Andrew should consider himself lucky because there are men that have wasted decades. In that same interview, Andrew announced that he is going to ramp up the pressure by having the original creators of Page create a new exchange where the first contract out of the gate will be a fully backed silver contract. He calls this the silver arrow and the Achilles heel of the fractional reserve bullion banking. While I believe physical silver is the cure for this debt-based world, I fear that even this effort will be for nothing. You cannot solve a problem from the same consciousness that created it. You must learn to see the world anew. Albert Einstein. Andrew admits in his interview that the men he is up against operate with impunity and none dare challenge their power. While Andrew is correct that these men are very powerful, I do not feel he fully appreciates what he's up against. The Rothschilds and the Rockefellers have power that goes beyond the markets that he is fighting against. The Rothschilds got their Hong Kong Mercantile Exchange up and running in no time, but the outsider plan of Page got shut down. I fear that while a few phone calls shut down Page, something much worse might put an end to his next venture. He is up against men that have their wealth and power derived off of spreading debt and death throughout the world. Just look at the founding of HSBC. You will see a bank that was set up to funnel drug money from China during the Opium Wars. These families that he's up against own the world's central banks, and by extension, all other banks, corporations, governments, regulatory agencies, militaries, and so on. This is why we see men like Saddam Hussein invaded and killed for daring to sell his oil for euros. This is why we see Gaddafi invaded and killed for even proposing that he sell his oil for the new gold dinar. And this is why we see war drums beating for Iran as they continue to sell their oil for any other currency than the dollar at their oil bourse in the Isle of Kish. This battle is not just about silver, it's about world control, and there is no way to win inside of a paradigm that they control. If these men control nations that can wage physical war against other nations to maintain their power, what chances do you think Andrew Maguire is going to have? Andrew Maguire's new company, Coughlin Capital, is set up to help people stay inside the paper paradigm that they claim that they're fighting against. You cannot reform a corrupt system by gambling in their corrupt casino. You cannot defeat an electronic market with another electronic market. You cannot defeat a centralized power with collective action. You cannot overturn a secretive banking institution with more insider guidance. In order to truly win this battle, you need to be of the opposite consciousness on every level. The Silver Bullet and the Silver Shield is my best attempt at this opposite consciousness rebellion. The plan is to convince enough people to sell all of their paper assets and buy physical silver, to walk away from the paradigm at every level, not fight against it. That is an opposite consciousness, as it shows that every action has an equal and opposite reaction. By taking your wealth out of the paper casino and buying real physical metal in your possession, it acts as a deleveraging event that will end their paradigm. It is a decentralized effort with the opposite consciousness of any other action I've seen out there. Any centralized effort out there will be put to a halt by the criminal elite by focusing on the most powerful opposition, as the Hunt brothers' story showed. Even major proponents who champion silver can and will be taken out by any means necessary, as this power will not go quietly into the dark. If you can describe a problem better than your audience can, they will assume that you know the answer and follow you anywhere. Far too many people are good at describing the problem, but fall short on their answers. If the problem is a rigged stock market, then silver stocks are not the answer. If debt is the problem, bonds are not the answer. If market manipulation and greed is the problem, then playing in their casino is not the answer. I find it ironic that there are so many who can properly diagnose the problem with the dollar and the markets, and then offer solutions that are more or less of the same consciousness that created the problem. They rail against the dollar, but offer you secret stock tips for a price. The reason why this is because there is no big money in the opposite consciousness. Even silver investors who focus on dollar profits are a part of the problem. You cannot talk about dollar price targets of silver, or even future dollar profits, and be of the opposite consciousness. You must see that you're buying physical silver because the fiat world is mathematically going to collapse, and that only real tangible assets will preserve your purchasing power. Only then will you be a strong hand in the physical silver market. I would ask that more people think about this battle in terms of becoming the opposite consciousness in order to win this battle. If some of the biggest names out there set aside their own efforts to endorse the Silver Bullet and the Silver Shield, we could truly end this battle once and for all. A decentralized, educated mass of investors taking physical silver off of the table is worth 100 Pan-Asian gold exchanges or Hunt brothers. You cannot change the outside world to become free or happy. You must change yourself to make the world free and happy.